I have prepared for worship this week, mindful that this weekend that we are called upon to remember the people who have lost their lives in service to our nation in the most vicious of human endeavors, war. This day of remembrance was first called Decoration Day, and only much later became what we know as Memorial Day. This is not a day for celebrating triumphs. It's not a day for patriotic songs. It is a time for remembering those who have died. Those men and women who did not come home from theaters of war. Memorial Day is a time for sober reflection. We are called upon to honor this day with one simple directive, that on tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we would pause whatever we are doing and for 1 minute remember those who died. There are no parades, only silence. There are no speeches, only silence. The call for Memorial Day rose during and after the bloodiest conflict in the history of our nation, the American Civil War, or the war between the states, whatever you learn to call it. In that war, more than 620,000 soldiers died, an untold number of others. The first large celebration or observance of Memorial Day took place on the 30th of May in 1868 at Arlington Cemetery across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. On that day, folks gathered in the cemetery there and began walking among the graves of the dead, placing flowers on them, reciting prayers and singing hymns. The people who gathered that day decorated the graves of both Union and Confederate soldiers with flowers. In 1971, Memorial Day became a national holiday, a day on which Americans were called to pause and remember those who died in wars, in all the wars our nation has fought. Today, that number is more than 1.1 million and continues to rise even this day. As I prepared for this day and for my remembrance of these men and women who have died, I recall the opening scenes of the movie Saving Private Ryan. If you have seen that movie, perhaps like me, you would say that you have never experienced 20 more horrific minutes depicting the assault of the beaches on D-Day at Normandy. It's the most horrifying portrayal of war I ever witnessed personally. To this day, it is difficult for me to imagine what our world lost, what we lost in the death of so many young men before they even made it to the beach. They had come from farms and villages, towns and cities across this nation. Some volunteered, some were drafted, all were soldiers. They prepared for war to defend freedom and democracy, called to service. Yet on that day, their lives were extinguished in minutes. And whatever gifts and treasures their lives promised for us were lost forever that day. Perhaps it is the horrors of the realities of war that inspire that code of silence among those who have physically survived it, and in many ways still carry its wounds today. It is with this terrible price of peace in mind that I first remembered a phrase from the 21st chapter of the Revelation of John. It is a phrase that you and I often miss because immediately we get carried away with the inspiring images of a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem. We run immediately to ponder what it might be like when God dwells on this earth alongside of us in the same way that Jesus walked this earth long ago. And we eagerly await that coming day when there will be no more death, no more mourning or crying, no more pain. And we wonder what it will be like to drink from a cup drawn from the stream that is the water of life. For when that cup touches our lips on that day, we will know that we are truly children of God, His beloved. All of these images are there to inspire us as we persevere in faith through life on this earth, and the chaos and the suffering and the anguish and agony that comes along with all the good gifts of life. But the phrase in the opening words of chapter 21 of Revelation that grab me most are these: and the sea was no more. And the sea was no more. To grasp the significance of this phrase, we must know what the sea symbolized for the Hebrew people. It represented chaos. It was something to be feared. It was inhabited by great sea monsters. Demonic powers stirred up sudden and powerful storms, taking the lives of sailors. And the dark depths of the sea became the tombs of those who died in its waters. The sea represented for the Hebrew fear, dread, anxiety. The sea expressed those things in life dangerous and beyond human control. You see, it is this primal fear of the sea that underscores the power of Jesus before His disciples when the winds and the waves obeyed Him when He spoke on the Sea of Galilee. Of course, in the 21st century, people like you and me, we may not see the sea as symbolic of the untamed and uncontrollable chaos of our world. But we still associate it with something. I don't know about you, but for me, since my childhood, the night and its darkness have symbolized this chaos for me. Things happen in the dark. But again, thankfully, and I am thankful for the author of the book of Revelation, for in chapter 22 he says, there will be no more night. Those threatening expressions of chaos and dread, sea and night, according to the Revelation, shall no longer exist. And God in His power and in His compassion will banish all of their fearful and dreadful accomplices. Death will be no more. Mourning and weeping will be no more. Death and dying will be no more. Pain and suffering will be no more. And if I may draw from Isaiah, who undoubtedly has inspired the Revelation, there will be no cry of distress. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion and the ox shall share a meal. And no one will hurt or destroy in God's holy presence. The past shall become the past, for God is ordaining something new, and we will all drink from the stream of the water of life. As I explored this passage in the deep chaos of our world, I recalled a movie entitled A Man Called Peter. If you are over 50, you may know of this movie. If you are younger than 50, you've probably never seen it. The movie portrays the life of Peter Marshall, a Scottish immigrant who became a Presbyterian minister, who became the chaplain of the Senate, whose poetic preaching and Scottish accent inspired thousands of worshipers during the 1940s and 1950s until his sudden and untimely death. In that movie about his life, in one of those quiet interludes before chaos and war engulfed the war for a second time in the 20th century, Peter was asked to preach at the Naval Academy. On that day, for some day, he jettisoned his sermon that he had prepared and began to address the midshipmen at the Naval Academy through the text we have listened to today. A text about death and dying. He acknowledged that it seemed odd to him that he would be drawn to this text on that particular day before young men in the prime of their lives, but he stumbled on. That day was December 7th, 1941. And later in the afternoon, on his drive back to Washington, his radio would spill forth the news that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. It may be that we are always drawn to these words whenever the chaos of life, like the sea, overwhelms us and darkness hangs around us like a shroud. We are drawn to these words for, in the end, the vision of John inspires hope in us, for it promises that chaos will not reign, that darkness will not ultimately suffocate us, that pain and suffering, mourning and death will not have the last word. Yet, despite those words of hope, I am grateful in the face of the terrible cost of human life for these words. That on that day that is coming, God Himself will wipe away every tear from our eyes. These words comfort us. These words take seriously the suffering and the pain, the anguish and the agony that we know in the living of our lives. God takes seriously the things that chaos and darkness rob from us, and before its power is banished, God Himself with His own hand wipes away the tears from our faces. So whatever wounds the chaos and the darkness and the dread and the fear have left upon us will no longer be remembered. They are banished forever. But back to the beginning, and what may we do so that we are not lost in the fear and the dread before the chaos and the darkness? For guidance, let's go back to the genesis of the day of remembrance, back to the American Civil War, back to the Battle of Fredericksburg. In that battle, Union and Confederate forces faced off. Casualties were high on both sides, but greater among the Union troops. Many of the dead and the wounded lay between the battle lines. Men cried out in pain and thirst, appealing for the sympathies of the soldiers on both sides. Richard Kirkland, a sergeant in the 2nd Carolina Regiment, approached his general with a request to go to every wounded soldier and give him a cup of water. At first, his request was denied. The general assured him that the moment he crossed over the line, he would be shot and killed. Sergeant Kirkland realized that he might die, but he was willing to take the risk. And so, moved by the nobleness of this man's desire, the general gave his permission. Armed with canteens filled with water, Kirkland went over the wall. A shower of bullets came toward him. Fortunately, they all missed. He reached the nearest wounded soldier. He propped him up to give him some comfort. And then he poured water onto his parched lips and left a canteen of water by his side. When the soldiers on both sides became aware of what he was doing, the firing ceased. For an hour and a half, a solitary figure made his way across the battlefield, tending the wounded of both sides. He was assisted by his comrades filling and passing him canteens until his task was done. His general, who noted this event and recorded it for us, noted that Kirkland had recently found Christ in the camp and that he too died on a field of battle. Faced with the chaos and darkness of the world, the serpent rises regardless of what we hope or pray for. But let us move from complacency and dread to offer compassion to the wounded and the dying, even at the risk of our own lives. Let us, in remembering, choose to become angels of mercy in this world until the sea and the night are no more. Let us be angels of mercy until the sea and the night are no more. And God wipes away every tear from our eyes. Amen. It becomes more distressing to me as I grow older, and maybe that's a sign of growing older, that we seem to be so wrapped up in ourselves that we cannot stop to pause and to honor events that would call us to look more soberly at ourselves and our world. So before we sing the final hymn today, I want to ask you to do a couple of things. First of all, you can take out your cell phones if you have a smartphone and they set an alarm for you, or tear off a piece of paper and grab a pencil and write down 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. The only observance of Memorial Day that you and I are called to make is to pause for 1 minute of silence tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Now, those of you who have served our nation in the armed forces, would you please stand? I want to charge you with this responsibility, that on tomorrow, you teach us how to honor your brothers and sisters who did not come home, but who lost their lives in battle. And may we all stand together tomorrow and pray for the God of heaven to make us instruments of His peace. And let us dedicate ourselves to living in peace. Let us refuse to pick up any hatred, any intolerance, any fear that would ever justify, again, turning chaos and night loose on our world. And let us ask God to be gracious in granting our prayer. Amen.